So we've got Matt Wright here today. Matt's company is called Noble Word, and he's given me a couple of paragraphs just to read out, so I'll try and do them as naturally as possible. Having been a copywriter for the last 10 years, Matt used to be an accountant, and he was driven by numbers rather than words. However, having travelled the world extensively and lived overseas in Brazil, don't think I knew that, Matt, lived in Brazil, France and the Netherlands, language was always his passion and has since become his profession. An intelligent idiot, those are Matt's words, goes to the heart of his approach to copywriting. For example, asking simple questions to cut through the jargon in order to produce clear, concise marketing copy. I've known Matt for about 10 years, and he actually very patiently and expertly copy edited my book. I have a copy of it here. Some of you know that I wrote a book called Soft Skills for Strong Leaders. And if you have a look at it, you'll see Matt's name is mentioned in there because he was the copy editor. And it certainly wouldn't be the book it is today without Matt's prompts and, you know, all those red lines, cutting stuff out and asking questions. You know, why isn't this covered? Or maybe this should be covered. So that's great. And Matt is also part of one of the local networking group that I go to, although it's local on Zoom at the moment, most of the time. And Matt's really good. He without anyone asking him, just summarises the meetings and writes an overview, and we sort of share it between members. And there are times when I think, was I at the same meeting as Matt? Because it makes it sound really interesting. Of course they are. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Matt, who's got some great information for you.
Right. Now we need to share the screen, don't we, first of all?
Yes.
Where's that gone? Ah, there we go. Excuse me.
Let me just... earlier.
The one we prepared earlier, exactly.
There we go. Oh, yeah, perfect.
There we go. Helen is, of course, being far too modest. Helen did 99.9% of the work. I just kind of came in and added my 2 penny with from time to time, which is maybe what a lot of writers actually do. Thank you for those questions. Very, very interesting. I'm going to try and work, I've been taking notes. I'll try and work them into the presentation. Well, not really a presentation. It's more just like a little 15-minute run through blogging. Please do feel free to ask questions as you go along. It might be easier if you put it in the chat as you think about it, and then we can take them at the end. But if anything's absolutely burning, you know, please don't hesitate to shout out. Going to go through this. It's just a short presentation on a few things about blogging. It should take no more than hopefully 15 minutes. And then I think we're going to go into some breakout rooms. Helen's going to basically revert to her bossy type, call you all by your first names and put you in various breakout rooms. So, and I'll be on the naughty step somewhere probably. So I've kind of changed the presentation recently in light of some of those questions. And I think someone says, you know, what is a blog? And I think that's a very good question, because the official definition of a blog, it's a web blog or weblog. I think it's a discrete, informal diary style entries. So that was how they were envisaged. And of course, you know, blogs can be a multitude of forms now. There isn't any one type for a blog, but that was how they originally started off as, sort of informal diary style entries. I think it's quite a useful thing to actually remember when we sometimes get a bit ahead of ourselves and sometimes over plan a blog. Let's go on to the first one. I think the first point I would say is think like a reporter. And I know that not all of these publications here are ones you'll necessarily have read before. Although actually, someone was saying the other week that The Sun is the most circulated newspaper in the UK. I think that means often on building sites, it goes around to about 7 or 8 different people. But the point is, The Sun's always written some very good headlines. Now, the content might be, you know, kind of towards the lower end of the scale, but in terms of grabbing your attention, I just had a flick through some past headlines, and you can probably add some more here, but you know, these are the ones that probably entered the popular parlance. Gotcha, you know, is a very famous one. And there's just some of the reporting headlines, because of course newspapers have got a very short amount of time to grab your attention. You know, think of walking through London when you have the Evening Standard. You used to have that, and the the old headlines on a newspaper booth, and it's what caught your eye. And this is where words and images, so for example, 9/11, you didn't really need a huge amount of words there. The image kind of captured it, where you can take a popular saying and twist it slightly. One giant leap for mankind there with Barack Obama. But downright funny. I did quite like the Sunday Sport one, hide and seek champ found dead in cupboard. Anyway, so the point is that I think that's your first port of call is your headline. It's very important because people are much more likely to open a headline which sounds interesting than one that sounds absolutely deadly dull and boring and far too long as well. So first thing is short is generally better, and have a bit of an angle there. I actually put a presentation together quite a long time ago, but often we're writing about quite dry subjects. It's not always an interesting one. This was, I think, when Greece was going through its crisis, in the Euro. Did Greece have a madman strategy? Which I thought, it sort of gets you interesting. The actual content of it was very, very dry, the Greek negotiating strategy with the Euro group. But actually it got your attention at the outset there. You can have very dry subjects and you can still add an element of interest to them. Just because it's dry, the headline doesn't have to be dry either. Because the reader's then thinking, well, I'm going to get someone who's going to hopefully cut through that sort of stuff there. So good title or hook and an introductory summary, which establishes, the argument to be discussed in the rest of the blog. That's quite important as well, because often if you are writing a blog on your website, you often have a preview pane there as well. And it's the first couple of lines after your title that actually, people are looking at as well. Somebody I think asked, what is the point in blogging? Now, I mean, for those of you, I don't know in terms of your website, if you're interested in where they're ranking, but probably one of the best things for ranking or improving your ranking are blogs, because Google loves them. They're index content. So for example, like if you put a YouTube video out, they aren't indexed by Google, so it doesn't search those. But each time you put a blog out, it shows that you've updated your website and it automatically ranks you higher as well. So, there is a good reason for doing it from an SEO marketing point of view, if you're sort of into that sort of stuff there. Number two, be topical. I just had a quick flick through the BBC website this morning just to see what sort of headlines and images sort of came up, and these were three of the ones. So obviously COP26 there, time for net zero, and I guess I'm always kind of thinking like, what could be a good title for a headline? Because if you're writing a blog now and there is a popular catchphrase of the moment, if you can tie into that, people will know what you're talking about. They instantly kind of, net zero, are you in? I thought, that could be quite a good one there. Lewis Hamilton in Brazil, maybe less so. I quite like the colours of that one there, but there could be a, going down to the final line there. And there's another shock article from BBC about turkeys for Christmas. I don't think voting for Christmas, but will there be enough turkeys for Christmas? So there. But the time of the year, Black Friday is coming up. We've had Halloween and so on and so forth. Sporting related, weather related. I think somebody was saying about, how to actually try and keep your, what was I say? How to get a bit of consistency with your blogging. Now, one of the things you can do is, I'm always quite in favor of having a loose plan for the year. There are things called evergreen blogs. So if there's a certain time of the year where a certain blog will always become topical, whether it's at Easter or Halloween or Christmas or whatever, you can kind of have a plan of the year and then schedule certain blogs in there. And sometimes it just quite helps to find that you've got, January, February, March through to December, certain events in the year. And there's certain things that maybe as a coach, depending on your business, will trigger a certain sort of type of approach or a certain blog or a certain way of thinking. So you can actually schedule in advance what you might be thinking of, rather than just sort of coming to the week and thinking, oh, shush, I haven't written anything, and then just putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. There's nothing wrong with writing a blog quite a long time in advance. And you don't have to write it all. You can write it kind of in summary. The worst thing is always starting from scratch with something. I always find if you've got something, I've got loads of blogs partly written, and I'll often go back and think, oh, you know, that's quite an interesting one now, and I'll repurpose it. So yeah, you don't always have to start from scratch, I think, which is probably the enemy of most people, because it just becomes too much like hard work there. Start with a bang. You've probably seen the old inverted pyramid. Start with your main point, less important points, quoted information, and at the end. It's a really, and again, when it comes to planning, we call it the 5 W's and how: the who, what, when, where, why, and how. If you're struggling for something, I have that down as like a little mnemonic at the side. And I make sure if I'm writing something, especially for a client, that I fill in all of those 5 W's. It's amazing how often blogs forget to do that. They don't tell you the when or the where or, you know, the who or whatever. And it just often gets you going on something as well. It's just about writing something down. So lead with your big point, because that's the one, as we were saying in the preview pane, will come up there. It's not like an essay where you introduction and you sort of build up to a big crescendo. It's an inverted one, so you've got your crescendo at the start. On this point, actually, and this might sound a bit controversial, I will often write my title last. I won't write it first, because often what you do is you think of a good title and then you try and sort of almost cram the content to fit that, and you'll find once you've written your blog, it might go in a slightly different direction. And then you've got that horrible thing where you're trying to cram what you've written into the title already. So I would say don't. I would say, by all means, have a working title. But often once you've written your blog, you'll think, that's what it's about. And then you can be a bit more creative in thinking of a title. So generally I'll have a working title, but I'll actually go back and often repurpose the title afterwards, as far as I'm concerned there. So it's not an essay, but you can plan it a bit like an essay in terms of having your key points down there. And somebody else asked about recycling. So if I'm planning it, I would often have, for example, if it's something that will go on a Twitter headline for somebody or a LinkedIn, I would just have certain paragraphs with different colors. So I might have a yellow highlighted one. If I'm writing it for someone, I'll say, okay, this is what you can put in your LinkedIn. Green might be for Twitter and whatever. So as you're writing it, you sort of, excuse me, have a think as to how you repurpose it, because the worst thing I'd say to do is just to write a blog and leave it. Ideally, it's something, once you've written it, you want to almost kind of you could take 4 Twitter quotes out if you use Twitter, by all means LinkedIn, which probably is, I'm guessing, one of the most effective forms of marketing for coaches going forwards. Use the blog to illustrate, the LinkedIn. So have a think, what's going to be a good LinkedIn title or a LinkedIn snippet? And it can be more than one. I would say often a blog could give rise to, let's say, 3 or 4 points. So don't confine your thinking, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say there. Remember your angles, but remember to engage by angles. I'm really thinking about your audience here. You've all said there's lots of different sorts of coaches, I know, and you've all got different audiences who are interested in different things as well. So knowing your audience is the first thing to actually writing content that is for them. Often people will just sort of write something blithely, close their eyes, press send, and just think, I hope it actually hits home. Take a bit of time to think who your audience is and what they're interested in. And again, that can actually help you to write the questions that will interest them going forwards. So, good and not so good blog examples. Helen very kindly, I know obviously Helen's often looking for content for the website. Loves it when coaches send content to her. And I think this is just one example of some content which Helen thought was pretty good, and it does read pretty well as well. So I've kind of gone through this, and I've just done a few little bullet points just to say where I think, excuse me, it ticks the boxes. First of all, have a headline. Even though you're writing, this is about. Sorry, excuse me a second. This is about engaging with people. And visually, people's eyes are drawn to pictures. So by all means, have a picture and illustrate that picture with something. It sets the tone for the piece. Don't be afraid to put pictures in your text as well. It breaks it up. The title, as I said, often I'll leave it to last, but that's really your entree into the piece. It's the first thing people will see when it clicks up on a feed or LinkedIn or whatever. And that's what's going to actually encourage them to click through. You don't have to read all this, it's just an indication here. So this particular coach has got a style of writing where everything's on a separate line, which is fine. That's the authentic voice. That's how they write. It makes it easy to scan, which I think is a good thing. Personally, I wouldn't always do it that way. You've got subheadings in there as well. Great for breaking up the text, and also telling you what each paragraph is about. You don't want, I know as a copywriter, people think you meant to copy. People write me to write less words rather than more words. Anyone can write more words. It's easy. It's writing less words. It's much more difficult. So subheadings help you to break that up going forward there. Not so good examples. I haven't copied the whole text out because we could be here for ages going through it, and again, it's always quite subjective. So I kind of went through a few headlines, and actually this is by someone who writes a lot of blogs who self-critiqued their blogs and said which ones didn't work and why. So this is kind of taking it from there. So first one, why tomorrow is too late when it comes to social media training. And the issue was here, it was written by a social media marketeer. So it already sounds like you're being sold from the outset. And the title doesn't actually promise anything. Second, social media for job seekers, an interview with Brenda Blackburn. Now, Brenda, I'm sure, is a lovely, lovely lady, but there's no context here as to who Brenda is. She isn't Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, so she's not a household name. So why is Brenda relevant? Why should she be? So that's something I would put in the title if I was going to do that there. And of course, it assumes that all your audience are job seekers. So I was going back to saying about, knowing your audience as a coach. If all your coaching clients are job seekers, then fair enough. But if they're all running their own businesses, then it's not necessarily going to be the best blog for them, is it? 5 ways to maximize marketing reach with content marketing LinkedIn. I do often like using a number, 3 ways, 5 ways, 4 ways, 6 ways, because it kind of frames the blog, because people know they'll get 6 points and whatever, and they can scan through it. So that side of things I would say is quite good. The author here said actually he'd written the content he had written actually the title first and the content second, so I got that the wrong way around. And then he tried to actually stuff it all in there. And the title's confusing anyway, maximize reach with content marketing and LinkedIn. I don't quite know what he's talking about already there. And number 4, 21 Twitter marketing hacks, writing better tweets faster. And again, he'd written the title first, and then he tried to actually sort of cram everything into it afterwards. And I think he wanted to get Twitter into the SEO. So he just kept going on that one. So there was that disconnect between the title and the piece afterwards. Yeah. So, quick summary then. So I would say it does all start with the title. I think it's incredibly useful. Have a look around you. Look at papers, look at magazines. On the internet, you've got clickbait, which specifically is to encourage you to click on. Now, a lot of them are quite, low down in terms of their tone and content, but the way they actually to get you to click on it, it's obviously at the extreme end of the scale, but it's just pointing out how you can often be influenced by going down a rabbit hole by clicking on things as well. So, the whole point is you want someone to read your blog. So at some point you've got to market yourself to some degree there. And again, taglines and the subheadings, that keeps the reader interested. As I said, it's not an essay, but often I think so knackered from almost writing them. At the end, they just end, and you just end in midair almost. So I would say at the end, you could have a stock ending, but be clear what you want from somebody. And I mean, somebody was saying actually about how to engage with people. Don't be afraid to ask questions, I would say. I think it's great to ask questions. You see it quite a lot on LinkedIn where people are asking for their opinion on something. And this goes to the point, and I think somebody was saying about not being an expert. And I think you can have a lot to say on a subject without proclaiming yourself to be an expert, but you can use a blog to ask for more information. For example, don't be afraid of using a PS for that as well. It stands out at the very end of a blog, a PS, and people will scan through to the end. So put a PS in bold. Maybe, you know, please reply to me if you've got any issues with this or any thoughts or whatever. You know, create it into a debate if you're worried about being seen as an expert. And then you'll get, you know, a lot more interaction, I would say, because you're inviting it, and be clear that you're inviting comments, you know. So I would say don't end a blog just in midair, you know, be clear about what you want people to do with it. And I always think it's great to ask for some feedback, some advice, you know, opinions. No. Don't overstuff your blog. I always think the rule of 3 is a great one. I mean, I know you've got the rule of 3, you know, cool, calm, collected. Things scan better in 3s, but I know beforehand, when I was an accountant, I worked in the city for a long period of time, and used to have to take in a huge, massive information, and I was summarizing it. And fund managers would often say they couldn't remember more than 3 points about a company, you know, in terms of a company's results or whatever. And so you try and summarize it down to 3 points, because they don't want to say you know, they don't want a whole list of 15 different points. They want the 3 main issues to focus in on. So obviously there's a balance here, because as Helen says, you know, the blog, maybe for a coaching blog, doesn't want to be too short, but likewise, I don't think you want too many topics in a blog. I would find sometimes if I'm writing a blog and I've got too many topics in, I'll make it into 2 blogs, which is brilliant. But don't make your blog too long and have too many points, because at the end of that blog, you want your audience to remember, let's say, these are the 3 main points. And if you start going over that, make it into another blog. It's a lot easier that way, I would say, and you don't lose your audience that way. So I think that was most of what I wanted to say. I might have skipped a couple of things there, but we can kind of take those in the questions. If there are.
We've got some great questions here, Matt, actually. And should we just do a couple of questions before we do the break?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So Elaine was asking, what's your view on asking questions in headlines?
Yeah.
And also Elaine was, well, actually, yeah, 3 questions from Elaine, actually. The other one was about headlines. Any pointers on the best length for a headline? So if we just talk about those first.
I think, and again, I should say, I think questions are great. I really like having a question in the headline. I was always taught, well, not taught, but I think that the fundamental emotions that drive people are generally fear and greed. Fear of missing out, or fear of not knowing something, whatever, and greed in terms of wanting something. And questions are a great way of actually sort of cutting through to that, but in a not too much of a salesy way. And a question is an emotive response. You know, it sounds like somebody isn't lecturing you. And again, it gets over that, I think it was Kate who was saying about the expert issue. And I think it cuts through that at a question, because by asking a question, you're almost bringing yourself down to the level of your audience rather than standing above them. And they scan really, really well. People love a question because it's that degree of, maybe I'm not quite sure about this. Can you help? I was looking some of the best titles. You know, I was writing them down. Ones that start out with "oops," you know, they're slightly self-deprecating. "Oops," or "I have a problem. Don't do this." So I think within that context, questions work really, really well in terms of bringing you, I wouldn't say bringing you down to the reader's level. That sounds a bit condescending, but you know what I mean. It puts you on a par. In terms of length of the title, generally not too long. I think you could have, again, if it's a complex subject, I would try and keep a title shorter. You can almost have a subtitle in a way, which is a bit more of a, you know, it says what it's about more. That's how I try and break it up. If I found my title was being too long and I just couldn't shorten it, I'd almost split it into 2 and have shorter, punchier title, and then maybe under that have like a subtitle saying this is a guide to whatever. Again, it depends upon the context, it depends upon the audience.
Before we talk about other questions, should we just do the breakout session and then we can come back because there's been more questions that come through from that. You okay with that, Matt?
Yeah, fine.
Okay. And so if I'll just put everybody into pairs, I think that's nice. It's just a random selection. What's the question you want people to discuss in their breakout sessions?
What's your next blog going to be and what's your headline going to be?
Easy. Okay, great. All right, and I'll just put you in for 8 minutes because you're in pairs. I think that should be plenty, and then we'll have a chat around it and answer more questions when you come back. So we'll see you in 8 minutes. Nice to see you all, pretty much all back. We've got Sandra here. I think Sandra's connection was a bit slow. Nikki, hello, nice to see you. I saw you crept in on the back row. Great to see you. So how did you get on? Let's go round sort of in your pairs. If you want to just unmute, let's see who's in watch. Kate and Nikki, you were together. Do you want to unmute and tell us what your thoughts were?
I can. My dog's kicking off, so I'm just going to be around me. I'll let Nikki start in a second.
Do you, Nikki?
We had a really good chat about knowing who your audience is and writing to your audience, and that if you've got, so in my case, 3 different niches, what's the common thread that sits above all of them, so that the audience that we're writing to something that's relevant to all of them, or choosing if we're just writing to one segment of our audience, making sure that we only send it to that segment so that it doesn't confuse the others. So we had a good conversation about what's the thread, or what's the sort of the subject that's relevant across the board, or what questions are they asking that we can just write something to answer a question. So I've done quite a lot recently speaking on the difference between coaching and mentoring. So write a blog on what's the difference between coaching and mentoring, and if they're asking a question, write a blog that answers the question. So make it simple. I think sometimes we overthink these things on going, oh, I've got to write a blog, what should it be? And actually just go, well, what question do they need me to answer this month?
Yeah, really good point.
No, Nikki was wonderful because she made me realise that our website has different audiences, because we see more services you add to it, the more different audiences there are. But how do you communicate to them all? But also just don't be afraid that the blog can go to different people, because not all those audiences are going to want to read every post. And I think that's a big difference. I've worried that my audience is going to get lost, but it's the common denominator that's the interest.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Gary and Patty, you were in a little group.
Shall I start, Patty? Yeah, it was really interesting. The end of our conversation was interesting for me, because Patty was describing how she was sort of a bit inspired by what Matthew said about planning over the course of a year or a period. And she said she uses in her overarching, I guess, website or personality of her business, themes of the seasons. So we're starting to think, well, maybe I can plan that as part of use that theme as part of the plan for the year, and not get caught up in needing to generate something at the moment. And I think I was wrestling a bit with a blog I've been thinking about for a while on how to choose a coach. Not this idea of chemistry, not necessarily meaning you have to get on with this person. And we talked a little bit about that as well. I'm not sure I've come up with a headline yet, but the subtitle might be how to choose a coach. But I'm thinking about something from the dating world, or something like that. You don't have to get on with the person you end up with.
That's an interesting one.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Thanks.
So it was interesting just to bounce ideas around, and maybe that's a bit of a theme as well, that actually just to chat with somebody else might just spark things, whereas coaching can be a bit, you know, you're on your own, aren't you, really? So you know, maybe a way of finding that sounding board is quite a good idea.
Yeah, or you could interview each other, couldn't you? A couple of coaches, couple of supervisors get together.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, thank you.
Patty, did you want to add anything? Okay, that's us.
That's done. Thanks, Patty. Dorothy and Fiona, how did you get on?
I'll let Dorothy speak.
All right, okay. I have never blogged at all, as I said earlier, but I found it very motivating and so interesting talking to Fiona. And I'm actually going to read quite a few of her blogs when we finish, because I feel very, how can I put it, very warm and happy and ready, but I've got no idea what topic I'm going to be writing about or what anything is about. And Fiona very kindly facilitated me. Within a few minutes, I felt I was beginning to shape an idea in my head. So I really appreciated that. I enjoyed it. But I don't know what Fiona might.
Oh, absolutely. So it's a lovely exchange of somebody who's been doing it for a while and somebody who's really at the start. And I asked your permission to share my journey and how I got involved and why I was doing it. Yeah.
Right, that's the benefit of going to breakout rooms with other coaches, isn't it?
It is, it's brilliant. Yeah, it really is.
To take each other's thinking, which is great. Thank you. Thanks, Dorothy. Hopefully that's motivated you to get started.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you.
Right. And Sandra and Elaine.
Yes, I think we were both similar actually in that we were sort of trying to think about topics that were kind of relevant to our prospective clients and things that we thought would be of interest. I particularly like what Nikki, I think it was Nikki who just said, don't overthink it. I think that is my problem. I think if I don't think too hard, then things kind of flow more naturally. And in terms of what I want to write about next, I want to write about target setting. So I'm a leadership coach. It's the end of the year. So typically lots of businesses that they're getting very anxious about whether or not they're going to meet their targets. And I want to write something which is focused on, but what if you don't meet your target? How do you manage that scenario? How do you manage the conversations around that with yourself, your peers, your bosses, and how do you manage that? And in conversation with Elaine, actually just kind of talking through it very briefly, she said, well, there's 2 or 3 things in there, actually. That's not just one blog. And I think it's having that mindset where you don't constrain yourself. You don't think it all has to be just one blog and one document. If that resonates with you, Elaine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other point that I made is that I think it's much more interesting when you're drawn to particular topics and really have an interest in something. It's almost like as long as that's relevant to your audience, then that draws out your best voice, you know, authentically, because you've got a real passion for it, you've got a real interest for it. So for me, it's actually perhaps less about what I think my audience might want to hear. It's more about with the, you know, the extensive experience I have and like we all have, think about the things that you're really drawn to. What messages and what articles would you be interested in reading? And that kind of shapes that I write about. It's more instinctual.
Yeah, really good point. And actually, while you were in breakout rooms, and I was kind of in a breakout room with Matt, and we were talking about, a little bit on content, but also about the length of the blogs, because Elaine, yes, Sandra, you were asking, you know, is there an optimum size of blogs, you know, number of words? And I was saying, you know, I've obviously, you know, we publish blogs on the directory, and please do submit your blogs. You know, I've put out some guidelines because, you know, you don't want a huge, great big long essay, as Matt was saying. But sometimes I've had blogs submitted and they're well over 1,000 words, 1,200 words. And first of all, I think, oh, I've got to read all of this. And then I think, you know, is it going to hold somebody's attention? Is it too long? Once you start reading, actually, you know, you can't cut it down and it's worth putting out there. But equally, I've had blogs submitted which are just a couple of hundred words, yet, but they're really powerful. It's just somebody's thought, you know, stream of consciousness and thought, and just a topic that's just come to them in that moment. And actually, and that's all that's needed. So it's fine. So it's, yeah, maybe, I don't think we should be too constrained, but yeah, don't let it be too long, please. When you're submitting them. Yeah, brevity's good. Matt, did you want to add anything else to the other questions that have come through?
No, some very, very good points there. I think I was just following on from your point. I think I was minded. I think it was Mark Twain who said, I would have written a short letter, but I didn't have time. Don't confuse the length of something. Often it takes longer to write something shorter because you are being more precise. You know, you can hide things in 1,200 words that maybe you could say in 300 or 400. So I would probably always veer towards the shorter end of the spectrum. But as Helen and I were discussing, I think, again, it depends on your audience. You know, if the coaching audience if your typical coaching client would generally want to blog a slightly longer one of 400 to 600 words, you know, write for your audience. But you know, I would say always have in mind that the attention span and so on and so forth. So, you know, if you're writing longer stuff, you know, make sure you can hold their attention. No, I think there's some great stuff there. Planning over a year, themes of the season. I think it's a great thing to have. And again, it reduces the panic. I know when I'm doing it with companies, you can use things like Hootsuite if you're doing it around social media campaigns. I don't know if you come across that, where you can have your LinkedIn and blogs and Twitter posts combined, but it's a great way. I'd often have like a 90-day planning thing if I'm doing it for a company. So have them think ahead 90 days in advance. Otherwise, they get to the end of the month and there's this panic if they use an outside company. I've got to give content there, and they end up just chucking content out. So if it's 90 days, you can always often change around. Maybe it's something you've got 90 days in advance, you can bring it forwards, but you know, having a plan always reduces that panic element, I find, as well. Be cryptic. I think authentic. Someone was talking about authenticity. I think it's a great thing. You know, what you like and what actually resonates with you. Could be a certain book or TV show or whatever, but the kind of themes from that you can bring into your writing as well. It's about you as much as a coach, and you can ask those cryptic questions within that context. Great. I'd written down here, aim for the moon and hit the stars, when I think someone was saying about the blog where maybe you haven't actually hit your target, but you've come close to it. So it's not always, you know, again, you can use phrases in there to actually get that across in the title. I think I wrote a blog recently about followership rather than leadership. So turning leadership onto its head. So how to be a good follower rather than a good leader, because there's about 20 million hits out there on being a good leader, and there's only about 1 million on being a good follower, which is important in an organization because not everyone can be a good leader. So sometimes turning something around in its head, you know, can be a great way to look at things. I think it was Avis who had the advertising campaign, you know, we're the second best car rental company ever, you know, and this is why we're proud of it. So yeah, you know, coming from a less obvious angle, because I think it will always be a good way around things. Yeah, that was it from me.
Yeah, great. Nikki, you just put a long post on the chat, which I haven't read because I was listening to Matt. Do you want to just unmute and share that?
Yeah, it's something I did quite a few years ago, as just from the content planning bit, because I was struggling to come up with what's my content, and I just got a piece of paper, listed the letters of the alphabet, and wrote a coaching keyword against every single letter of the alphabet. Some letters have got more than one keyword. And I'm still working through my letters. So this month is Y is for yo-yo, the roller coaster of life. So when you said what's my next blog, that's the one that I'm writing at the moment for November. I'm not working through them alphabetically. They're in I pick whichever letter is relevant at the time. So I'm topical. So I'm not hemmed in by, I've got to do letter whatever this month. But I was telling Kate in the breakout, I had somebody got in touch with me saying, I'm trying to crack your code because you've done letter this, then this, then this, then this. I'm trying to work out what it means. What's the secret message? I'm sorry to disappoint you, it's random. but it was just a nice way of getting different engagement. I wasn't expecting that. But it was a really easy way of coming up with content. If you're doing a blog a month and you've done 26 letters of the alphabet, that's 2 years worth of content.
Really, really good tip. And the other thing that somebody recommended to me years ago was about, you know, you have International Leadership Week, or, you know, Mental Health Awareness Week, or, you know, a day for this and a day for that. There is a website that tells you which days or which weeks are allocated to what particular topic. So that gives you an idea of what's going to be topical on a particular week or day. So that's another tip. So we're nearly at the end. Matt's thinking, phew, thank goodness for that. It's been a really great session, a really good reminder. Are there any questions that we haven't? Oh, thanks for that, Nikki. Yeah, the National Days awareness. Oh, there's a question here. Matt and I talked about. It was, is the best way to post on your website first and then copy across to LinkedIn? I would recommend that you do that. I only know that, you know, our SEO guys have said it's best not to have duplicate content on your website. So that's why I always ask for fresh blogs. So you might want to, again, not have duplicate content on your website. So put it on your website and then put it onto LinkedIn, but go onto LinkedIn and refer back to your website. And again, that's what we do. When you post blogs, we do lots of stuff on LinkedIn and get people to come and look at your blog on the directory.
I think we were saying, weren't we, that LinkedIn's a great way of opening discussion.
Yeah.
So if you've written something and you want, you know, and maybe you haven't quite, as we were saying, at the end of your blog, asked people for comments or content. I think LinkedIn is a great way of actually, you know, really kicking that off and saying, you know, what do you think? You know, what's your experience of this? And then again, if it's a good topic, you'll find it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a virtuous circle.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Matt. I'm going to round it up now. I'll be asking you a few more questions and finding out what you're taking away from today. Who's inspired to go off and write a blog who maybe wasn't before? Is that yes? Dorothy? Yeah. Great. Your work is done, Matt.